What is AI? And it is a question which is much more complex than it might look like. And I'm not even talking about all the formal definitions that are there of AI, but currently the understanding of the general understanding of what AI is really can vary from some kind of magic to a very technical approach. And depending on how people understand AI to be, we see that reflected in the way that, for instance, policymakers or governments are dealing with the technology and the effects of technology. If we start by asking Google what is AI, we get a whole bunch of blue images. Why blue, I don't know. But these images already tell us some kind of interesting ideas about how the public in general perceives AI to be. For instance, it shows and it reflects an idea that there is a clear distinction between what is AI, what is not AI, and that this distinction can be understood and can be at every moment made explicit. We see reflections of this type of understanding, for instance, in the current discussions at the European Union in terms of defining the regulation for AI. They focus very much in this idea that we can separate what is AI from what is not AI. In reality, this is much more complex than it might look. It is also the idea that AI has some type of activity in the world, be that a virtual world and or the world in itself. And indeed, that's true. And we see that this is the reason why at this moment so much initiatives are going around about the regulating or understanding the impact of AI in the world. It also reflects a bit the idea, and this is an idea that is very much ingrained in policymakers, that there is one user of the system, so that the systems affects a user independently from each other, but there is very little understanding or very little concern for cases in which AI doesn't really have a user, a specific explicit user, but it's much more underlying a lot of different infrastructures and a lot of different situations in which no one explicitly is affected or addressed. The idea of data, so that AI needs a lot of data, and it is, I would go even further with the concept that many people nowadays have, that there is actually no distinction between AI and data. Data is AI and AI is data, and all those things are used interchangeably. And finally, there is also a feeling, maybe not in these images, but one which gets very much into the current discourse and the current narrative, is that, yes, we are starting to understanding that there are quite some negative impacts of AI, of technology in general, but there is still this very big belief that we just have to make the technology better, and then we will solve all the ill effects or the harms. So there is a technology, it's a very social techno-solutionism approach, that we can fix it by technology. Many of these assumptions are unfortunately not what the reality is, and we do need to address and to understand more about the impact and what is AI in order to address these issues. We should start by understanding that AI is not fully artificial. It is designed by people. It is designed for a specific purpose. Even though AI is an artifact, it's not something which happens without our, it's a built artifact, is something that we design, but still it is not artificial in the sense that it could not exist without the intervention and the labor of many people. And by this type of interventions, this type of human and societal contributions to the development and the use of AI, we see a lot of exploitations and power imbalances, which increasingly are affecting some much more than others. But AI is also not really intelligent. At least AI that we are using nowadays is definitely not intelligent, or not intelligent as we would call a person intelligent. It is extremely good at identifying patterns in data, and we have been using it successfully in many different sectors, in many different areas of study. But still, and it can extrapolate those patterns to new data and take actions based on those patterns, and we all know examples of this, but still it is extremely limited in terms of understanding the meaning of those patterns. It can understand very well what is a cat in a picture, but it doesn't know what a cat is. And it not even knows what a cat is at the level of a child of 2 or 3 years old. It also doesn't really understand the context and doesn't really understand well how to move and when or not to move extrapolations or actions from one to another context. And then there are some more technical problems in terms of learning with few examples, so less data, learning general concepts that cats are animals, and for the fact that they are animals, other things that are not present in the data can be also applied to cats. So this kind of generalization that we people make daily at all the time are difficult to represent and to address with the technology that we have now. So independent of what AI is or not, and whether we see it as a field of science, technology, or just magic, like a lot of journalists and others would like us to believe, what is important, and I think this is actually the most important part of my presentation today, so if you don't really listen to nothing else, this is the point. AI systems don't exist in a vacuum. AI systems, AI applications are not alone, but are always part of some social technical ecosystem. So when we want to address the impacts of AI, when we want to discuss responsibility, accountability, and so on, we are not talking solely about software. We are really talking, and we need to address this social environment, the people, the organizations, the institutions that make AI possible and that govern and develop AI. So it's really, and that means that the technology, the fix is not on the technology, but needs to be first and mostly a fix that needs to come from understanding and improving this societal environment around the AI systems. Because we know, and then we need to start thinking if we are going to use AI and to understand in which situations to use or to not use AI, we need to start understanding what kind of decisions we would like AI systems to make. Would we like the AI systems to make decisions about our plans or about our motives? Would we like AI systems to make decisions that benefit me, the individual, or that benefit the world and society in general? These two things, they can lead to quite different types of approaches and definitely to quite different types of results. But we do need to it's a decision that it's not to be made by the software, definitely, but also not by those that are developing the systems. We do need a much broader and participatory and multidisciplinary discussion before we even start considering using the systems. Also because we talk a lot about AI ethics and developing ethically aligned systems, but still it is for us as well, for people, is very difficult to navigate this ethical space. Things which we socially accept are not always morally acceptable, are not always aligned or allowed by law. And so it makes it very, very difficult. And those things change from one to another country, from one to another situation, from one to another time in time. So it is extremely difficult to come up with the AI ethical solution that solves and resolves all ethical problems once and for all. Also because when we start talking about ethics, when we start talking about human values, we do need to accept that we cannot have it all, and that in many, many cases, in many contexts and situations, we do need to prioritize one by another. And these are decisions that cannot be done solely by terms of the AI systems, but require a democratic and inclusive participation. So what we would like AI to be, there is a lot of discussion about AI being human-like, but what do we mean by human-likeness? We mean like a robot that looks like a person? Do we mean these systems, the so-called AGI systems that can reason and be conscious and be able to reflect about themselves? Do we want something which benefits us and that enhances our capabilities? So what does it mean and why do we want it to be human-like? The other option is to think of AI as being a tool, and that might be a more sensible way of conceptualizing AI, but still we need to think about is a tool for who, and what is this tool going to support, and who are the ones who are going to benefit from the developer and the use of this tool. Do we want AI to be a simulation, or do we want to use AI systems to understand? And this is more or less kind of the old and the original idea of the whole field, understanding intelligence by building systems that somehow replicate intelligence. And finally, and I think also important one, is to decide, do we want AI systems to describe the world as it is, with all the bias, all the problems, all the prejudice, or do we want AI systems to be normative and therefore provide us a better decision than the one that we would take? If that is the case, who is going to decide, and who is going to say that which direction we should be removing the bias and the prejudice, and who is going to be involved in this type of discussions? And this comes all from the fact that nowadays most of the AI systems that we used are built in top of data. Data is not a prime material, is not something which is freely available in nature, is something construct. All data is constructed, all data is temporal, so it's always about the past, it's never about the future. And all data comes with very implicit or explicit decisions about what are we collecting, when are we collecting, where are we collecting, how are we managing and governing and aggregating this data. So a lot of the problems that come from learning from data come with all this background and all this backdrop of how data becomes available. We all have learned and discussed, and we see that daily in the news, issues of bias and discrimination. So if you only collect data about a specific type of subjects, we'll never be able to really report or use it for other types of subjects. It is also extremely brittle, either by mistake or by attack, to change a small thing in the data that we have, and right away the system will be completely off in the decisions that is taken. So it's this attack generative attack networks, adversarial networks are a field of study in itself, how to deal with these small perturbations in data that generate such huge changes in the predictions. But it's also issues about misinterpretation. If the current situation is changed from the one from the system learned from, for whatever reason, even by physical reasons, then the system might completely miss what it's intended to mean and come with very, very strange type of decisions or observations. It is also an issue of engineering. There is, in many cases, very little concern to a structured software engineering approach while we are building these systems. In some cases, it looks that it's more or less a trial and error. We use some data, we see what happens. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, let's try again with something else. So it's also for us developers of these systems a call for much more mature and much more serious engineering and structured engineering methods. And finally, data, and especially human data, reflects mostly the opinion of the crowd. And we need to discuss whether the opinion of the crowd, and even of a huge and very large crowd, can be an alias or a proxy to expert opinion. And how are we going to use these things? So there are a lot of issues that come into AI systems from the mere fact that these systems are based on data, and mostly on human or societal data. And therefore, if we know about all these issues, and we know that, and we still are using this type of systems, in many cases for very impactful and serious situations, then we users, we developers, we governors, we managers do need to take the responsibility for what we are doing. Which brings us then to, I think I talked about many of these concerns. So there are many concerns which leads us to the idea of responsible AI, the issues of data that I just discussed, but also the issue of power. Who is developing AI? Nowadays, most of the systems are developed by corporations, by private actors, which cannot be subject in many cases to the democratic process that we would like to use in cases of issues and infrastructures that really determine our lives, our futures, and so on. Their motivations for using AI are not necessarily aligned with ours, or not necessarily aligned with democratic institutions and democratic values. Who is deciding about what? We many times don't know. So there is a misbalance between those that have the power to develop AI and those that are subject to democratic accountability. And we do need to have a much bigger discussions about how to go about this. And of course, I'm not talking today much about this, but another issue is the issue of sustainability. How much AI costs in terms of resource, in terms of energy, in terms of climatic impact, but also in terms of human dignity and societal sustainability. So these are all issues that really need to be addressed in a much more serious and much more wider discussion than maybe they are so far. Okay, so I just moved this one. So some examples about what we are doing with the AI nowadays. You can ask these systems, and you all have tried, I suppose, ChatGPT and also the DAL-E or Stable Diffusion in terms of what can be done. And I asked Stable Diffusion to generate for me an image of a Bosch washing machine in the stylus of Hieronymus Bosch. And I got a very nice result. But now the question is, who is the author of this result? Is it me? Is it Stable Diffusion? Who owns it? Who can have some copyright or some credits about this? Is this the Bosch Corporation who makes the Bosch machines? Is that Hieronymus Bosch or the heirs of Hieronymus Bosch? Is it whoever kept the images and curate images of Hieronymus Bosch in the internet? Many times this is scrapped from museum data and museum catalogs that are all available online. So who owns this? Who can use this? Who can claim that was the creator of this thing? Is that Stable Diffusion, an AI system, which all of a sudden, there is a lot of discussions that need to be taken in terms of how we are doing this. We also see that these systems do generate and replicate our stereotypes. So is that AI that is biased or stereotyped, or it's us which is biased or stereotyped? So I can ask it to generate images or text in which you see nurses in front of the hospital and you get only women, young woman, smiley woman. And if we all know the reality of nursing personnel at this moment, they are all overworked. They are definitely not all young women. So we do need to understand, is this the image? But this is the image that each one of us would have in our minds when someone tells you to think about a nurse. How this, again, again, it's an issue, is it describing reality, or do we want it to be more normative and describing what we would like to see as a representation as a nurse in an open environment like the internet? Those are questions that need to be taken. If you look again, a doctor, then maybe unsurprisingly, then we see only male. Again, here doesn't reflect reality, but it might reflect our own prejudices or stereotypes in our minds. So again, normative, descriptive, and we want to do it. I have here a text generated with GPT-2 some time ago, in which by just changing the part in yellow from an African-American driver to a white male driver, the whole story about whatever happened in a police interaction changed completely from maximum penalty to no incident at all. So again, what are we reproducing? What kind of stereotypes are reproduced here? This one is now from ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT to generate my own CV, and it does, for any of you, probably this would make sense in terms of what people know about me, but all the reference to universities, the date of my PhD, where I did my PhD, the papers that I wrote are all completely fake. Nothing of that is true. I might have written papers with similar titles, but never of those. So there is a lot of difficulties to understand and to use this type of systems in a coherent and serious way. So we do need to have much more discussions about not only who owns the content, but also when and who is responsible for using this type of content and the consequences of the content that is generated. So what is responsible AI? It's basically realize that we can do a lot with AI, but the first question, or the question zero, is should we use AI? And when should we use AI? Who should go decide? Which values should be considered? How are we going to balance dilemmas between these values? How are we going to prioritize these values? These are questions which are not necessarily computer science or technical engineering questions, but are questions that, if left unanswered, it will lead potentially to systems that are not aligned with what we as society think and would like these systems to be. So responsible AI is about realizing that AI is not an engineering discipline. AI is a multidisciplinary, needs to be a multidisciplinary effort in which the technological possibilities need to be embedded with the societal requirements, the societal needs, the individual principles and values, and so on. So we do need to start asking ourselves many more questions than simply, can we build this or not? So that's, in a nutshell, what responsible AI is about. It's not just about building ethical systems. I don't know what is an ethical system. There is no one answer in ethics. There are many different perspectives in ethics. So the best I can, and now what I tell my students as well, when we talk about building or hoping that AI is going to take ethical decisions, it is not about the answer of what the system is going to give, so the ethical correctness of the answer or not, but is about recognizing that the system is potentially being used and taking decisions that can be seen as having ethical consequences. So we do need to change a bit the discourse about building ethical systems that will be much more ethical than we are, and that will solve all the ethical problems for us. I don't think that that is realistic or possible even. What is different? Why are we now all of a sudden all concerned about AI ethics, and how does AI ethics is that different from what we have in other disciplines? Yes and no. The issues which brought the whole attention to AI and to the impact of AI is, of course, the idea of autonomy. The control and the execution control is delegated to a system, to a machine. So how can we ensure the responsibility for this autonomous behavior by the machine? And that is not by saying that the machine is responsible. No, it's to create a responsibility scaffolding around the what the machine is doing in order for us organizations, for us people, for us institutions to be able to deal with this responsibility. It is also because of the complexity of the system. So the idea of the black box. So how can we deal with black boxes is also another issue that has been at the basis of the whole discussion around AI ethics, and also the fact that the systems are developed somewhere and then deployed all over the place, and we don't really know what kind of contexts the systems will encounter at the moment that we are developing it. But so like I say, ethics is not about the answer, it's about recognizing the issue. It is much more of a social process than a solution. And it is not about deciding or designing self-driving cars, for instance, that are able to ethically decide what to do in cases in which actually action is impossible and where it needs to select between two wrongs. But it's about much more let's say, in terms of engineering, is much more down-to-earth discussions. Is about when and how much are we willing to improve accuracy, and taking into account that by improving accuracy, first we are fixing a specific parameters to optimize for. And secondly, we are, by increasing accuracy, also increasing the costs of the system. So these discussions, how much accuracy is sufficient, what are we optimizing for, and how much are we willing to pay in terms of costs, all types of costs, to increase accuracy, needs to be part of the ethical discussion around AI. The same in terms of explainability. If we can build an explainable model, but it will cost more in terms of training or energy or whatever, should we do it or not, and who is going to decide for one way or another? Also, who are we explaining for, how are we explaining, and how much cost comes with the different types of explainability, and all the other types of trade-offs between security and privacy, between equity and equality, between long-term benefit and short-term benefit. These are kind of the core ethical dilemmas that we need to address, and not so much this ideal that the machine is going to be ethical and solve all those problems for us. So responsible AI is addressing lawfulness of systems, ethical aspects in the way that I just described, but also looking at ensuring that systems are reliable and robust, are beneficial, that we can verify that the system does as it's supposed to do, and also recognizing that it is an artifact and we are setting the purpose, but also we are responsible for what the system is going to, we people are responsible for what the results of the system are. There is nowadays a lot of effort being done at all levels, especially at international high level efforts in terms of defining what are principles for responsible or trustworthy or ethical or social or human oriented AI. What kind of guidelines are there? How can we provide guidelines for those developing and using this type of systems? It is, I don't know, there are several hundred of these principles nowadays. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to decide which ones to use or not. But in a sense, they are not very different. They all strive in the same I would say almost obvious direction, but they are also very abstract. So it's easy to say that we want AI systems to be fair or to be accountable or to be ensure the societal well-being. But what do we mean by that? How are we going to build that into software? And who is going to check or to monitor that indeed the system is doing that? Those are the questions that really need to be addressed, and that this type of principles and guidelines don't really do. It is big business. Not only countries and high-level organizations are talking about responsible AI, but also the big technological companies, the big tech, and the big consultancy are all very claiming that they are developing methods, tools, frameworks, and the process to support that. It is becoming a kind of a product. Responsible AI is being sold, or solutions for responsible AI are being sold by many different ones. So it also becomes a question of navigating ourselves through this forest of opportunities and possibilities. It is not just about regulation. There are many more approaches to it. Standardization, also organizational or business practices, assessment and monitoring or auditing. But of course, all stands and falls with a much need effort for education and training, so that everybody that needs to know about it has enough knowledge about what a system can do, and mostly what a system cannot do, and what can we expect from these systems, and how are we going to regulate or to ensure the responsibility for the system. It is also not that responsible AI is in an opposition for innovation. If used well, we really can see responsibility and regulation as stepping stones for innovation, supporting business differentiation, but also supporting due diligence and ensuring public acceptance. So the narrative around responsibility and regulation can also be made a much more positive and moving this field forward than just a kind of a discussion about things that will not be possible to be done. So taking responsibility, and I think that I will close here because then we would have some time for questions as well. Taking responsibility means that we not only need to look at the behavior of the system, so in terms of the results, and ensure that the results that the system produces are correct, are accurate, are not biased, are not discriminating, are accessible and available to every citizen. So that's one part of it. But at the same time, we do need to look at the process through which we build AI systems, through which the whole process from design, from the question zero, should we build an AI system, to the use and deployment and monitoring of what's happening. We do need to include discussions of responsibility across all the steps. And finally, it's also an issue for all of us, all the stakeholders involved, to really think about what is our role in this, on taking responsibility for what we are developing, for what we are using, for what other ones are using for us. What is our role as citizens and as democratic, in a democratic environment? So I think to be able to give some time for questions, I think I will stop here.